Coming to you from our opulent and luxurious 4x8 refurbished room closet at the national headquarters in Indianapolis. With duct tape studio lights and a mic that you barely can hear, we hope to entertain and educate you. This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
All right, hello, and welcome back to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. I am your host, Mark Seavey. As always, I am joined by my two co-hosts, Jeff Daly from Hollywood, California. Hello, Jeff. And Ashley Gorbolja Maldonado, whose name I have continued to pronounce correctly, which I think should earn me like a Bravo Zulu award or something of that nature. A grilled cheese sandwich, which I did just get delivered. If you happen to be watching our last podcast, you'll know that. And we are joined by a very special guest today who makes us all feel pretty humble about our academic achievements. But Mr. Kermit Jones, Dr. Kermit Jones, MD and Juris Doctorate as well. He's a primary care physician, lawyer, and healthcare policy advisor who has provided care in multiple settings, including underserved communities, military personnel, and overseas in India and the Middle East. He's also a member of the California Bar Association. Prior to his current practice, he worked as an FDA regulatory and patent attorney at a boutique Washington, D.C. law firm. He served as a White House fellow from 2012 to 2013, where he worked with the Department of Defense and health educators on military medical issues. Before his government service, he served as a Navy casualty evacuation doctor with a Marine helicopter squadron at Camp Pendleton, California, and then later in Al Anbar province in 2008. Great time to be there. I'm sure that was quite the vacation. And here's where it gets... He earned his medical and law degrees both from Duke University. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Georgia Tech and a chemistry degree from Clark Atlanta University. He's written articles and given lectures on domestic and foreign policy, as well as our need to transition to a proactive healthcare system. I don't know how... Once I finished law school, I resolved to never step foot in a classroom setting again, so congratulations to you. I don't know how you did it, but you obviously have a great deal more patience than I do. So, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it. First thing I'd like to say is thank you for reading all of that verbiage. The only thing I would say is if my dad were sitting here with us, he'd be like, look, I told that kid to leave school 10 years before that and get a real job.
Yeah.
But apparently I just like to stick my heads in the books, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So thanks for having me on the show. I truly feel honored to be here. The American Legion has done such phenomenal things for veterans, as a nonpartisan organization, and just even, reading the history of it, I wasn't aware that it was instrumental in getting the GI Bill passed, as well as instrumental in getting a Department of Veteran Affairs. So hats off to everyone who's dedicated their lives and careers to this organization and serving veterans. So thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. All right, Jeff, I believe I said you would get the first hack at Dr. Jones today.
You did, and since I'm first, I'm going to go a little easier on him because apparently he's a person who does not have a lot of goals or ambition in life. So it's amazing. One thing we didn't say is that you also speak 4 freaking languages.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. I'm still working on the first, by the way, but I have aspirations.
Good effort.
And I was taken also by the fact that I saw Marine Helicopter Squadron, and I thought I had a fellow EG&Aer here, but you're in the Navy. But since you saved Marines, I still got some Semper Fi love for you there. So,
yeah.
Did you notice he did not list Marine as one of the languages he speaks, though?
I know, that's what I'm curious
glaring
about.
oversight.
I keep tripping over Devil Dog. I just haven't gotten through it yet, but I'm working on it.
All right, Jeff. Okay, so my question, I want to say that I'm super excited that all of these skills you're bringing them to the American Legion. And I had seen that you had done some work in training Legionnaires on things regarding COVID. do you want to talk about? Do you want to give some advice about COVID things to the entire American Legion veteran community, which we have an infinitely small percentage of listening to you right now, but maybe they'll spread the word. So if you have some advice, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
In
Jeff.
2 languages.
Yeah, so do you want me to start in English or do you want me to start in Urdu? I mean, it's fine, because if you have ones that speak in Urdu, then we can go right ahead. Yeah, and I can joke about that in a little bit. But no, I would say the advice that I would give on COVID is, it's a very unpredictable disease that we're just learning about. I just listened to a podcast recently that was talking about how it seems as if even though our numbers are going up nationally, and as you're probably aware, it's going up in very rural areas right now, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, these places where they naturally socially distance, which makes that kind of odd. It seems as if the number of people that are dying seems to be less right now. I mean, I don't want to speak as if we know so much about whether there have been changes in the ability for it to kill people or not. But a lot of what we were basing our assumptions on initially was the reports that were coming out of New York or coming out of Italy. And, we're still trying to figure out, whether that's the case. I think the nugget of advice that I would give people, because this is part of what I used to do as a Navy doctor with the Marines, is to take it seriously. And I say that from the standpoint of right now, we're getting a lot of fatigue, right? I mean, I get it. We are a country of, rights and the Bill of Rights and Constitution. And that may make us a little different from some of the South Asian countries that, may have a different government structure and a different societal structure. So people are kind of wondering, hey, how did they get, on board with certain things a lot faster than we did? And I think for us, we're going through this fatigue phase, and it's also going to switch into the winter where people are like, look, I'm tired of not being able to go into restaurants, and I'm tired of not being able to see my family. But, the reality is this thing can hit you pretty hard. So just to try to, continue with those things that are a bit of a pain in the butt, until we get to the vaccine phase. And the second piece of advice I'd give people is have a very serious conversation about or with your healthcare providers about the vaccine. A lot of the studies that I've seen, surprisingly, up to 40% of people are saying they would not get the vaccine for various reasons. And I have this issue with the flu vaccine every single year. But this is one thing where we don't have a lot of channels out of this pandemic. I think a viable vaccine will be probably the only way we get out to a point where maybe in late 2021, we're starting to return to some sense of normal.
Oh, I said late 2021.
Yeah, it's not going to be earlier than that because the reality is the first people that are going to be vaccinated are going to be healthcare workers, essential workers. And one study I saw, the CDC say, best case scenarios, we could vaccinate 1 to 2 million people a day. We have over 300 million people in this country. So, if we assume that we get a vaccine by February, you can just, you can do the math that, you were taught how to do in 5th grade, right? I mean, that's going to take you all the way to the end of next year before we get enough people vaccinated to get herd immunity.
Wow. So I'm looking at a second COVID birthday, which I'm not super excited about in May. I'll probably have an online meeting with these 2 jokers, and I'll dedicate a piece of cake to them, but I won't share it with them.
The plus side of having a second COVID birthday is living to your second COVID birthday. So
yes,
the alternative is not spectacular.
That's true. So I guess I'm not guaranteed that second COVID birthday, but here's hoping. Thank you for that. And what did you say and I'm going to point out that we're both Michigan people. You're from South Haven, right?
South Haven.
I'm from Kalamazoo. You were my beach town when growing up. That's where we went to go to the beach.
Well, don't
start cutting into my. Don't answer that, sir. I know where you're going, and you're not going to ruin my question.
It's a Michigan question.
I know where he's going to go with it. All right, fine. Ruin my question. Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
I bet he doesn't. What?
I was just going to say, and I probably don't know what you're going to say, but I was going to say that Kalamazoo was considered our big city. We were excited going to the city in Kalamazoo, which was like a 30-mile drive up Blue Star, up I think it was Highway 41.
M43.
M43. Yep, M43.
All right, good. You did not impact my question.
See?
For once, you didn't ruin it. Jeff ruins everything he touches. He's like,
That's usually where I do a lot of eye rolls.
yeah. All right, Ashley, you are up with the second question.
Okay. So my second question is in regards to misconceptions about COVID and kind of pulling back some of the layers of misinformation. And I wanted to kind of get your opinion, Dr. Jones, on some of the posts that you've visited and how there's been like different responses and how you go about kind of, here are the facts, here's how we pull away, and how, like, what's your process for like educating folks that you've come in contact with?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Ashley. I mean, so I start with trying to understand or come from a place of empathy. There is a lot of misinformation about everything. We've become, more distrustful as a society and more political, and that's unfortunate. But I would say that the reality from what I've seen in terms of, New England Journal of Medicine articles and JAMA and these other sources that doctors get their information is, it is a disease that the majority of people make it through, either one with mild symptoms or end up hospitalized and come back out. I mean, that's true. Even if you were, let's say, your average risk person in their 40s and 50s, probably, 98, 99% of those people are going to come through it just fine. But the reality is for that, 1 to 2% of people that don't, that make up the 220,000 people that we know have died of COVID, and some estimates saying there may be even higher amounts, it's a different situation. For 2, there's a huge mental health component to this, which I think is not really borne out so much. And I've seen it in my patients, unfortunately. I'll tell you 2 quick scenarios. One, I've had a lot of patients because of the social distancing that have either, gained weight, strained relationships. They haven't been able to see, especially if they're older population, they haven't been able to see their grandchildren. And there's a psychological component to that. Or what I tell people, the rest of healthcare continues, which what I mean by that is I've unfortunately had, and it's not so much now, patients that have avoided the healthcare system because of fear of COVID. I had a lady who had a couple of wounds that she sustained, and then she called the office the next day and said, hey, I want to get these wounds sutured up. And anyone in healthcare would tell you, well, if they're not sutured in the first 6 hours, then, would be suturing infected tissue into the wound. So we can't do that, for one. And she's telling me that she's having fevers and these other types of things. And I was telling her, look, you probably, the infection is probably in your blood at this point. We need to have you come in. And she said, well, I didn't come in the day before yesterday because I was afraid of getting COVID. And, and I just had to educate her and say, look, your risk of dying of sepsis is probably 100 times higher than your risk of dying of COVID right now. And so part of what I do is, like I said, come from a position of empathy, just kind of explain what we're taught and the facts, and then try to assure people that if they get those other things treated, they'll lower their overall risk of death as opposed to just their specific death risk from COVID.
Thank you. No, that's very, very important. And I appreciate you, being both empathetic and, applying it to everyone's unique situation and making sure that folks understand that everyone is we're here to help, right?
Yes.
So very, very nice. Thank you.
Well, I was going to go with sort of the complacency kills and talk about herd immunity and everything else, but I read the letter that you sent to the American Legion headquarters, and in it you mentioned one of my favorite people in the entire world, who apparently was one of your high school coaches for baseball or one of your high school teachers from South Haven.
Medal of Honor winner James McLuhan. Yeah. Well, first I'd have to credit him with a lot, beyond just the service he did for our country. He's the reason that I'm having this conversation with you fine people today, because he's the reason I joined the American Legion. Because when I went back home to see my folks in 2017, and was at the post office mailing something, someone there knew I was in the military and said, hey, James McLuhan is getting honored by the American Legion at the post right down the street, if you want to check it out. And I said, of course I want to check it out. He was a social studies teacher for us at South Haven High School, and is probably the most famous person to come out of Bangor and South Haven High School, at least in the last half century. But the story I like to tell, in addition to his selflessness and service to our country, was that when my brother was in high school, which was 4 years before me, and this was in the late 1980s, there was an incident. Unfortunately, this was one of the ones where it was a lot rarer to see a fight break out in school where someone pulls a gun, whereas, like I said, today, I think that would not be an uncommon occurrence, unfortunately. But this was an occurrence where one kid pulled out a gun in the hallway against another kid, and James McLuhan continued to do his service, and he was the wrestling coach at our high school as well, and came up behind this kid and wrestled him down, and probably saved some people's lives that day as well. And so this was someone who at that time was probably in his late 40s, and still protecting and saving people like he did in Vietnam. And so when I knew that he was getting honored by the American Legion, and I went to that ceremony, I think within a week or so, I sent off my application to the American Legion.
Yeah, that's great. I met him about a year ago now at another Medal of Honor recipients banquet, and I happened to sit next to him on the bus on the ride to the White House, and I knew he had been an American Legion baseball coach, and I knew he had been a high school teacher, and I got to talk to him. One of the absolute nicest people you'll ever meet. And I don't mean just like nice, like as a Medal of Honor recipient, he's a badass, but he's also a nice guy. I mean, he is literally one of the nicest people I've ever met. He could not have been kinder. He's just so down to earth and such a wonderful human. As soon as I saw his name, I was like, oh yeah, I know where I'm going with this. So,
oh yeah. He sings too. Like he sings that American song. That's what I said. It's kind of hilarious. And he has a nice voice too.
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, he did sing it at David Bellavia's Medal of Honor. I can't remember what the context was, but I think he sang "Oh Danny Boy," if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, he's a very special individual, and we're really glad. From the American Legion headquarters, it's always nice to hear someone's entrance to the Legion being an actual thing we were doing in the community. So could not be happier to hear that. All right, we will take a commercial break, and we'll be back with you in just a minute. Did
you know the American Legion magazine is the most frequently read periodical in the nation? True story. Find out why by joining today at legion.org/join.
And we are back with Dr. Kermit Jones, MD, and Juris Doctorate. And Jeff, you are up for round two, my friend. I think you were having audio problems. Are we back? Are you ready to ask your question?
I'm good. You can hear me,
right?
Okay.
Oh, I saw you switching headphones.
He was speechless, which is a rare occurrence.
So seldom happens.
Do you see what happens to me here just from being the chief awesome officer of this organization? All right, so
sounds. I was gonna say it sounds like they're treating you like it used to be in the Marines, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Except they're not Marines, so it's insulting. So I'm gonna do a quick comment because we talk a lot about membership and how we're growing our membership goals here, and your story of membership is a good one to me because I always preach that it's about doing things and just kind of being out there and being visible. And I'm certainly glad that that post was out there and visible to you, and that you went and experienced it, and now you're bringing that kind of thing back, which is not a question at all. So I will move on. So my next question is: you've been bringing this wisdom to the American Legion members, and I'm wondering now if you can speak to, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but in recent times, the military, the DoD has banned anyone who has had has ever had COVID from being in the military. Now, is that what is that from? And I mean, they say now that it's a indefinite ban. They didn't say forever. I think the word was indefinite. Is that just what would be a medical rationale for if I had COVID in March and next year I wanted to join the military? Is there a medical reason for me not to be able to do that?
To be honest with you, not one I can think of. I think kind of going back to what I said before, even though we are learning more and more about this illness, and I'm sure you all had heard that there were some young athletes that had some inflammation around their heart, some myositis and stuff like that. Even with those types of things, there are other viruses that cause myositis. So, and many times people will get that and recover from it just fine. Their heart function will be back to where it was. I can't think from a physiological standpoint, given the fact that I was a flight surgeon at some point, or I did physical exams for a lot of active duty, Marines and other service members, that, from a readiness standpoint, if they've completely recovered, they're able to pass the physical standards, and there's no signs of their not being able to do the job, that they would have a permanent ban. Yeah, I'm assuming that would be something that'll be revisited because, I think one of the issues that had come up some years back, and I'm sure you've heard this in the news, was, we had some recruitment issues in the military writ large, right? Because just the general population wasn't as healthy, from obesity and other types of chronic diseases as they had been, in decades past. So, I think if you start banning people, especially given the fact that, we're well into 8 or 9 million people that have been infected with COVID in the United States. And in some aspects, they say from antibody tests, that may be a significantly lower number. You're talking about large numbers of people that would not be able to serve our country in one of the most meaningful ways that you can.
And then I had a related follow-up. You talked earlier about that we're just learning some things, and I read some things that suggest that, especially when people try to minimize the effect of COVID with numbers compared to other diseases or other means of death. But one of the things that I read about are the potential for long-term damage to lungs, potentially other organs, and things like that. And maybe that kind of feeds into the fear of the military is you get somebody in, and then 5-6 years down the road, we don't know what's going to happen, and they could potentially not be fit to serve down the road. So are you reading things about long-term, and granted, we haven't had it around long-term, so there's going to be nothing conclusive, but are you hearing or reading any theories about that?
Well, I think one of the challenges with COVID and maybe other SARS-type viruses is because it triggers in people that have some of the worst responses to it, an uncontrolled or unchecked inflammatory response. And so part of what that does is that triggers blood clots that people will sometimes have, the myositis that I talked about before in the heart, lung issues. And as someone progresses further down the spectrum of illness, if someone unfortunately, becomes intubated, where they put a tube in your throat to help you breathe, that causes other problems to the lungs. So, I think those types of people, you can draw analogies from other diseases and say, yes, it's likely that they're going to have long-term effects. But again, kind of going back to those people that have barely any symptoms, which is, I think, a large cohort of people with this, especially the younger population. It's not only, I think, too early to tell, but, I think if you look at other diseases that may cause similar types of ailments, it's just, it may not be likely that that's going to be the case over 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So like I said, I think it's too broad a spectrum of disease presentations for us to have a good handle in terms of what's likely going to happen. So maybe the DoD is just saying, hey, would rather err on the side of caution, but I still say, I assume that they'll revisit this sometime down the road.
Ashley, you are up.
So, Dr. Jones, I just read earlier today that the CDC, and I guess it was kind of like it was a fun title, but it was saying that the CDC is giving, obviously like low risk recommendations, and pretty much saying like giving us an excuse to cancel Thanksgiving. I don't know if you're a Thanksgiving man or not, but I thought it was kind of clever. I thought it was a clever article, especially to get kind of folks to read it. It had some sound stuff in there, and leads into my question. Everything has really changed for a lot of people from a sociocultural perspective, from a work environment, and I wanted to kind of pick your brain as to how you think between the healthcare delivering healthcare to some of the other at-large workforce, how do you think everything's going to change?
Yeah, this kind of points to some other conversations that I'm beginning to have with people in the policy world. I mean, that was one of the reasons that I got a law degree, not because, like I said, I just love to take on more debt in school and stuff like that, but because I had a mentor at one point who told me, look, healthcare's changing. It's not run by just physicians anymore. In order to really be an influential voice, you're either going to have to get a business degree, you're going to have to get a law degree. And I figured, well, I'll go the law school route because I don't think I could, learn constitutional law over a YouTube video or something like that, right? So, part of the conversations that I have when it comes to the policy realm is, how do we game out like we do, in the military, what the changes will be in the healthcare world. And not all of those are dire. You hear a lot of these conversations about the negative effects that COVID is having on society and the changes. Some of those changes are not necessarily negative. I mean, like if you look at the housing prices in the Bay Area and California, they're going down. Why are they going down? Because a lot of the tech people are leaving. Commercial real estate prices are going down because people are doing more Zoom conversations, meetings, than they are actually going. At one point they said, the carbon footprint of the world had decreased slightly because people weren't moving as much. So in terms of healthcare, I think there's some positive things that may come out of this. If you look at where we've gone over the last, let's say, 75 years, we've gone to a point where we've concentrated health into these institutions. You'll either go to a hospital or you'll go to a nursing home. You'll go to these physical places to get your care. And if you look at the price of healthcare, it's steadily gone up over the last 40 to 50 years. What COVID has done is it's forced a lot of patients to reevaluate where they're going to get their care. And it's required certain healthcare systems to become more innovative in terms of delivering care from home. Hopkins has a program that's been active for at least a decade called, I think it's Hospital at Home or something similar to that, where they, over these telemedicine videos and certain types of wearables and other devices, can treat you for similar ailments, heart failure, things like that, at home. It's reduced the cost by about 30 to 40%. And it's also made people feel more comfortable because they're in their house as opposed to in a hospital. We are a country that prides itself on competition. And I think, having this type of competition within the healthcare industry can result in lowering prices. And then also having competition in the nursing home space can result in situations where we have better regulations to make it so that people aren't in nursing homes and, getting illnesses that they would not have gotten had there been better oversight. But then also making it so that people can get that same level of care at home, having caregivers that would be usually family members that wouldn't get paid to get reimbursed for those types of things as well. So I think there are some positive changes in the healthcare system, ones that could lower price and more personalize people's care. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Thank you. I don't know if this is really important to me. My background's in public health. I have a master's in public health, and I did a lot of research on health policy and community wellness. And I've always been incredibly fascinated with both family structure, how we provide care, community care models. And I'm really happy to hear that you've been able to hunt the good stuff that'll come from this.
Yeah, that's, just to kind of add one little extra section to that, that is something I fervently believe in. I think we need more community-based care. I think there are a lot of people, like I tell people the story of, my mom who is being cared for at home, recovering from lung cancer, that but for us finding 2 very good caregivers for her at home, she wouldn't be here 2.5 years after her diagnosis. So trying to make it so that people can get their care from home where they're most comfortable is, I think, where we need to move as a healthcare system.
Awesome. Thank you.
So one of the big things you talked about, the mental health component, and I know that for a lot of people on both ends of the spectrum, for myself, I have 3 little kids at home, and social distancing to me is being able to go to work to get away from the kids and the wife nonstop. And then there are people on the other side of the spectrum who are, basically this has forced them into complete shutdown mode, where they're like in a Unabomber shack somewhere just watching reruns on Netflix. I know for myself, when COVID actually hit, I was preparing to do a ruck marathon at the Boston Marathon with a rucksack. If I put the ruck on now and walked 15 feet down the road, somebody would have to dial 911. Like, there's literally zero chance I would make it. But what I really wanted to ask about was, you had said earlier that there's a lot of bad information out there, and 100% accurate. And the problem that I see too is that there's so much other information that might be good, but it's like every day on Drudge or anywhere else, there's these new things. Like yesterday, I'm reading about that there might be a new breathalyzer test being made in Israel. But then you go deeper into like a CDC document and it's saying something different than what the WHO is. And I think that kind of lends itself, like, obviously, and I'm not going to go into the ethics of the British study where they're asking people to come in and get infected so they can see how it moves, which is kind of an interesting thing. But, I think a lot of people, when they're trying to get their quick fix on what's happening here, and they see that CDC and the WHO can't even agree on simple measures on whether it's airborne or not, or how long it stays on a playground metal rail or something. I think that the overload of this information has also kind of turned people off to the point where they're like, why bother reading about it if it's just going to change tomorrow and the information's not going to be good? Do you see that happening too? And what do you see as our left and right limit moving forward? Like, what's best case, what's worst case?
Yeah, no, I figured I'd get the hardest question from Mark. Yeah. I think unfortunately we see that in healthcare too, and I think this is a byproduct of what all 4 of us in this conversation are familiar with, because all 4 of us have been in the military, which is a branch of government, obviously, and so I've been taught, and I think this is pretty true, that any public sector entity, especially let's say the government, where you have elected officials, they're always going to, don't get me wrong, and I'm not saying this because, they don't have, the best knowledge or intentions, these other types of things, but they're always going to frame, I think, the conversations and the data that they put out based upon, at least in some component, what comes out on the paper the next day. What's seen in terms of positive versus negative. And so that's why I think governments in general, government organizations, are always going to be excessively cautious, sometimes to the point in which I think they can be, overly cautious. So like you had mentioned, are you going to get COVID from, the playground 3 days after no one has touched it? Maybe, but is the probability there that you'd get there? Likely not. It's like I saw a study in which initially they said, COVID could last on certain surfaces for up to 3 days. And then you find out later, they're like, well, they used artificial means to put so much COVID on that surface that there's no way humanly possible that you'd be able to get that level of COVID on one surface. So of course it's going to be there 3 days from now. So I think there's that challenge of, the government and these organizations similar to them that have a responsibility of putting out certain types of information is always going to try to put that information out in a way in which they will be as least wrong as possible. But then that's balanced against, I think, this environment that we're in where, if you look at during the Vietnam era, during Mr. McLuhan's era, you had two sources of information, right? You had like Walter Cronkite, and you probably had another channel. And then the rest of it was like, Howdy Doody and some other random stuff that people did. And then most of the time they went outside. Now, you have so many different sources of information with so many different agendas that, the genie's out the box, right? So we're not going to be able to figure out, I think, what's accurate or not. So, that's not an answer to your question. I realize that, but I think it just kind of highlights the challenges of what's out there. So to summarize it, I would say if people keep a healthy level of skepticism, but also I think a healthy level of trust, then I think we'll get to where, we're going to be able to get to in terms of society. Because right now there's just almost zero trust in any government related entity, especially, like I said, with the political environment.
Yeah, to me, it's like an Amazon rating. A natural bell curve would indicate that something be in the 2 to 4 range, and yet 90% are either 1 stars or 5 stars. Nobody looks at the 3-star review. Everyone wants to know why it sucks or why it's great, and
Right.
People don't focus to the entire spectrum. And I think that's a pretty recognizable threat to, when you have democracy is predicated on a well-educated electorate.
Right.
And unfortunately, even when they're trying to become educated on these issues, they're getting bombarded, and it's like, I'm not even sure where to start at this point. So I think it's a factor of our society. Sir, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to, Jeffrey? Did you want to pitch
I wanted to jump in on your section here. I think when we're talking about the public and these news sources and agencies not putting out different information, I think part of what you said, going back to, there was Cronkite, and then there was your daily paper and the postman coming by and having a chat with you for a minute. But now, because there's also increased competition with all these news sources.
Right.
So they put things out that are theories, and then that adds to the distrust when it's disproven a week later.
Right.
But the fact is, we're not getting fully baked news because everybody demands answers right now.
Yeah.
And then there's a competition to be the one that gives them the answer right now. And so again, as I say all the time, we the people are the source of a lot of our issues, where we question everything. We do way more questioning than we do trusting, and that balance is off. And I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I guess, no, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. I was just going to say, I guess my parting thoughts are a lot broader than COVID. I think COVID it's a signal of a lot of issues that we have in society right now. It's just, unfortunately, is a pandemic that, can kill people. But, I think getting back to the underlying premise of why the four of us are here, all four of us decided for our own various reasons that we're going to serve our countries in the military, give that social contract, between, government and society and on the other side of that, have a little bit more pride about, giving back and then moving forward. I think what struck me the most about Iraq when I was over there was I remembered an interview that of a random like Iraqi citizen or something, in which they were saying, hey, how do you feel about democracy and it coming to your country and, the blue fingers of voting and stuff like that and who you're going to vote for? And the guy was like, I'm going to vote for my uncle because my uncle can get my toilet fixed, And so I think what happens, when you look at across the Middle East, you look at all these other countries, the one thing that I wish I could really impart on like your average American citizen, because 99% of people don't serve in the military, is we have something very special here. I mean, there's no place else in the world, when you're looking at these other places in which, yeah, you can protest, police brutality, or not, I guess the perception or differences of, police brutality versus not, and these other types of things, or whatever you want to protest, flag burning or whatever, and not get shot down with, a 50 cal in the streets and stuff like that, right? Like just like what's happening right now. I think, I don't know if it was Iran or which country in the Middle East recently where people were protesting. No, it was Nigeria. People were protesting and they started shooting them. So I think the problem is a lot of us just take it for granted. The specialness of the Constitution, the specialness of where we've come as a country, the specialness of the ability of where we can go. And so I think if more people understand that, maybe they'd be a little bit more trusting, and maybe we would realize the importance of what we have so we don't ruin it. That's probably my biggest takeaway and what I'd want to impart. So thank you again for having me. I couldn't thank you enough. I appreciate
thank you.
We appreciate you being here, and I don't know what to say to that. 100% right. It's we do have something special here, and let's hope we can keep it. So, all right, folks. Well, we will see you next week. Don't forget to like and share all of our YouTube videos and our podcast, because I forget to say that every single time, but Jeff has hounded me to where I remember it. But make sure you go on there and leave some comments. Let us know what you think of the podcast and how we can fix it next time. We'll see you guys in a week. Bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
See you later. Thank you very much. Y'all have a good one. Be safe.
And we're out.